Thank you for joining me here at the Real ResQ Podcast, where we have teamed up with Vertical Magazine in the creation of Helicast. We are part of the family for the Vertical Podcast Network. We are alongside the Hangar Z Podcast, the Helicopter Podcast, Vertical MRO Podcast, and the newest podcast to the Helicast family, the Valor Flight Crew Podcast. You can check all of them out at verticalhelicast.com. Now, a shout out to our sponsors for this episode. Onboard Systems Hoist and Winch. When lives are on the line, proven performance means everything. Check them out today at hoist-winch.onboardsystems.com. Ready Bar. Originally made for astronauts, now designed for first responders and built for you. Check them out today at getreadybar.com. And the realrescuestore.com, your place to go to get your podcast swag. Now, coming up next, our guests are here to share a story that they were both a part of, without even realizing they were both there on scene together. But before we get into that, let's learn a little fun facts about these guys. We'll start with Dan. According to him, the kettlebell is the only piece of fitness gear you need. End of story. Football literally saved his life. And his wife, Unsuk, also known as Suzanne, is Korean. So he watches Korean dramas to help him learn the language. Now for Chris. He enjoys watching Dan watch Korean dramas so he can learn Korean too. He was at the White House when Osama bin Laden was killed, and he will eat almost anything and probably like it. So please welcome our next guests, pilot Dan Leary and flight paramedic Chris Pfingsten. My name is Jason Quinn. I am United States Coast Guard Rescue Swimmer number 500. These are my rescues and rescues from those of us that put our lives on the line every day so others may live. This is the Real ResQ Podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Real ResQ Podcast. I am pumped again for another amazing rescue story that's coming to us. But this one is like this episode, we get one story, and this one story is totally epic. And the way these guys came together to make all this happen is even more fun. So let me introduce our guest today. The first one, we've already had him on here. It's Mr. Dan Leary. He was episode 113. Prior United States Coast Guard pilot, currently flying with Life Flight. What's up, brother Dan?
Hey, good to see you again, Quinny.
Good to see you as well. It's so Dan and I got to fly together in Kodiak, Alaska for a hot minute, and like our stories and the stories that you told on your episode were just man, I still think about them. It was awesome. So if you haven't checked out that episode, definitely go check it out. The other guy we have with us today is Chris Pfingsten. He's a flight paramedic, also flying with Life Flight. What's up, Chris?
Hey, not a whole lot. I'm just happy to be here. This is exciting for me.
I'm excited to have you as well. And shout out to you. You have your own podcast, which is EMS 2020 with a 20/20. That's pretty awesome.
That has been a super fun thing to do. What we do is we just review real out of hospital calls. It's kind of the same vein that you have going on here in the sense that it's, stories that have really happened. And then the first half of the show is kind of recounting the story. And then the second half of the show is pulling out clinical lessons from like a paramedic perspective of what can be done differently or what do we learn from that kind of thing. And so, we've got like 180 episodes, I think now. So,
good for you.
You got some time if you want to put some time. EMS 2020. So yeah.
Oh, I'm glad we could shout that out together. That's good stuff.
Yeah.
So, cool. Well, let's get into the reason you guys are here. So you guys did a rescue together, which made headline news. And this one in particular was the Tillamook Headlight Herald. USCG helicopter rescues man after fall. This is dated July 18th, 2014. It says, Just before 2:30 p.m. on July 17th, firefighters from the Forest Grove Fire Station were called to a report of a fall near Gales Creek Campground off the Wilson River Highway. Officials say a team of surveyors for Washington County were working in the Coast Range when one of the men fell approximately 20 feet into the ravine and creek bed. So now there's a whole side story about how you guys even found out that you were on the same mission together that you guys didn't even know about. So I'm just going to turn this whole thing over to you guys right now. What happened?
We discovered, so at the time this happened, and this is, almost 11 years ago, I was working for a ground ambulance agency and I wasn't flying at all. I didn't have, to be a flight paramedic, you have to have your FPC certification. I didn't even have that certification at the time. And I worked for just a typical like ground, you call 911, we show up kind of agency. And I had no idea that when I did this call that I would later be working with the guy who was flying the helicopter above me. And so, fast forward to 2020, so, 6 years later, and I decide that, I kind of want to change in career. And I thought maybe I'm good enough, to go the flight route, and got to be a new guy all over again, and got to start working with Dan Leary at out at Astoria with Lifelight. And I start telling the story because, Dan's like, oh, I was a Coast Guard pilot. I'm like, oh, I got to tell you this one time I worked with the Coast Guard. And as I'm telling the story, Dan's like, wait, where was that out? Like Forest Grove Fire? And I'm like, yeah. He's like, that was me in the helicopter. And I'm like, no way. And so it was just
That
this
is so cool.
bizarre coincidence. Yeah, it was pretty amazing. So it was just like a small world moment. So it was
The funny thing is, the co-pilot on the mission, Jason Maddox, he now works for Lifelight too.
Yeah.
Oh, no
in
way.
fact, flew with him the other day. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, that's hilarious.
So our base
Wow.
is positioned right next to the Coast Guard base there at out in Warrenton, Oregon. And so I think they just retire and just walk across the ramp and then just put on a different flight suit, and that's it. So
Sounds about right, actually.
yeah. In fact, for a while, when I first got to that base, we had Dan, and Dave. And as our four pilots, and the only person who wasn't Coast Guard was one of the Dans, and he had other military experience. But other than that, it was Coast Guard. I think he was Army, and then Coast Guard. So yeah, a lot of coasties, fantastic pilots. So I love all of our pilots at Lifelight. They're all fantastic. Lifelight has really strict requirements for who can apply. But I will say the coasties are something else. I love flying with the coasties. So
that makes two of us.
Fantastic.
And I've flown with a lot of pilots around the world, and I love flying with U.S. Coast Guard pilots. And I don't want to give them a big head, but you do have to stroke an ego a little bit. So I you gotta be careful. Like, it's a fine line. You got to balance there.
Yeah.
All right, so let's bring this into the call. So you get a report, and I'm going to say you, Chris, you get the report of a man who fell into the ravine down to the creek bed.
Mm-hmm.
Take us from there.
Yeah. So I don't know. I think it was the middle of the day. Like, I can't remember exact. I know it was the summer because it was hot. I remember that distinctly. We got a report. So I was actually a supervisor at the time, and I was a new-ish supervisor. And I may have been a supervisor for a year or two tops. And we were reasonably low levels, which what that means in the ambulance world is there's just a lot of 911 calls going on, and you just don't have a lot of available levels. So what I would do as a supervisor is I'd go find some, EMT that didn't have a partner, or some of our office personnel were also EMTs. And so I'd run and be like, hey, you throw a uniform on. We got to go help out, And so that's exactly what I did. And the person I ended up running the call with is still a very good friend of mine. Her name is Taryn. She won't mind me dropping her name. I told her I was probably going to do it.
Nice.
So anyway, her name is Taryn, and she's like, okay. So we hop out and we start heading out to post, which a lot of people don't know this, but many ambulance companies, especially busy areas, we don't really have stations. We usually have one main base, and then we go like park in parking lots in busy areas because there's no point in putting a quarters there because you don't stay in it very long, right? The 911 system's pretty busy these days. So we were heading out to go post at the small town of Cornelius. And Cornelius, the reason we post there is because it's between two larger towns that get a lot of calls. And so it puts us in a good position. So anyway, so a call gets dispatched out for someone who had fallen down an embankment. And the initial dispatch information said they fell 40 to 100 feet, somewhere between that range, which was not the case at all. But that happens. So it was a very busy day, like I said. So even the fire departments were short of personnel. And so the initial dispatch for a fall patient was myself, which is considered an advanced life support ambulance because I'm a paramedic and we can do advanced things. And a fire department, what they'd call a brush rig, which is really just, it's a pickup truck that's typically deployed for brush fires. And so it's outfitted with things that are useful for brush fires. But a lot of times we need extra hands and people. And so the fire department was currently busy. They were deployed to other calls they were already on. And they can't just leave a call and be like, oh, there's a more important one. Sorry, hope you're okay. And then bounce. They got to stay and see that call through. So it was initially just us and a brush rig. So we start heading to the call. And on the way in, I'm really hoping there's going to be more people showing up soon, because just kind of listening to the call evolve and where they're at and knowing what I'm equipped with to get to where they're going to where they are, which is down in a ravine, is not necessarily adequate equipment to do that. I was really hoping other people were going to show up soon. So, and the other thing too, is I was the only paramedic that was responding. It was going to be me and my partner, who was an EMT. And if your listeners aren't familiar, there's several levels of medical responder. First responder is the entry level, and then you have EMT, and then there's EMT advanced, and then there's paramedic. Paramedic is a license versus the other ones are certifications. And if you want me to differentiate those, I can't. So you need to find somebody else. Because all I know is what it comes down to is that if someone's getting sued from a scene, it's me. So anyway, that's what I've equated that to.
True statement.
So anyway, so I'm going on this, I'm like, oh man. And basically what it boils down to is there's things that I can do that the others can't. And if you have someone that needs a lot of those advanced interventions, being the only person that can do them on scene, you can get task saturated pretty quick.
Right.
So anyways, that's kind of what's going through my head on the way in. So on the way in, we heard that the patient was conscious, but was complaining of rib pain and shortness of breath, which immediately starts making me think of a chest wall or lung injury on the way in.
Totally.
We end up
I'm thinking broken rib right off the get-go.
Yeah.
That's what I'm thinking. Like, just from okay, the dude fell and he's complaining of like rib pain. Yeah, he hit a rock or something on the way down and he's broken.
Oh, sure. And knowing the area and just being in that area, there's a lot of rocks to hit. So there's a good chance he hit a good sized rock. But yeah. And the shortness of breath is actually the thing that worries me the most, because there's a lot that can go wrong there in a hurry. So we end up arriving to kind of I guess you'd call it like a landing area. I don't mean that in terms of like an LZ, but it's more of like an area where EMS can park our vehicles and basically start the trek in to where he is. There was someone who was
You're talking like maybe like a pull-off area on the side of the road?
Yeah, essentially is what it was.
So, and I'm picturing this right now. So you guys coming up the road, and on some of the roads out there, like California has a whole bunch. They'll like literally grade out an area where you could fit like 3, 4, 5 vehicles on the side, and then it narrows back out again based on the windy roads that you come to. Is that what you're referring to?
That's pretty much exactly it. We had a spot there.
I might have been up there once or twice. I know where you're at.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. I do remember being distinctly worried because it was a hot, dry summer, and one of the reasons the fire departments have been so busy lately was just chasing brush fires all around the county, and I didn't want to park a bunch of running diesel vehicles into this grassy pull off because I'm like, we might create our own issue, but that didn't be the case. That's just a side note. But yeah, so we pulled off there, and there was someone who was with the guy, and it was the person who had called 911, I believe, had met us there, kind of flagged us down, said, "Hey, I'll take you in." And on the way in, and this was where things were kind of pulling a little bit out of my expertise, because what I was spoiled with at the time was working in a more urban to suburban system where you're going to pull up to the front of usually a house or a building, and your patient is just beyond the door. And so you pack everything in. Where my expertise was limited was, okay, there's a trail, there's a hike ahead of you to get to this person. Yeah. What can you bring? because you got to be able to pull out the person and everything you bring too, because your company's going to be really mad if you leave a $20,000 cardiac monitor in the bottom of a ravine. You know, someone's getting a new job after that. So anyway, so we were trying to figure out exactly what we were going to bring, and I'm like, well, and this guy tells us, hey, it's not that far down, and I'm like, all right, let's just pack all of our stuff that we'd normally take into someone's house, and so and we do, and so we end up packing. We pack several kits. One of them is being that cardiac monitor. Another one is a kit that has oxygen and airway devices in it to help with patients. We can start IVs, give drugs. We're taking all of it with us. And as we're going down to this patient, we end up finding that we're walking down a hill. And it's one of those hills to where if you were to turn towards the hill to walk up and you put your hand out in front, you'd be touching the hill in front of you. That's kind of the steepness of the hill. And so it's walkable. If you're in reasonably good shape with somewhat sure footing, it's walkable, but the dirt's also very loose. So going down with the kits was troublesome, but not impossible. I didn't really feel like we weren't like necessarily any danger, but it also kind of set in of, I'm starting thinking like, I hope there's another path out because we're not coming back up this way with the patient. So we get down into this, we find the creek bed and we kind of follow the creek bed over to where the patient is. And we find the patient who is sitting on a log, and they're in what we'd call a tripod position, which is someone with their butt on the log and they've got both their hands on their knees and they're leaning forward just a little bit. And he's got a look on his face as though he knows something is wrong with him. And as at that point, I was a new supervisor, but I was not a new paramedic. And I've learned to fear that look, you know, because you kind of have there's two categories of patients. Well, there's more than two, but you know, there's two I'm going to talk about. Okay. There's kind of two categories of patients. You have the patient who feels fine, but their vital signs are bad. And you're always trying to convince them to go to the hospital. Like, look, I really don't need to go. I think I'm fine. But they need to go, right? Because they can't see what you see, you know. Right. But then you have the other patient whose vital signs are actually okay, but you look at them in the face and their brain is telling them something is wrong and they know it. And those patients are the scarier patients because there's that sense of dread is a real thing. And he has that sense of dread. So he knows something is wrong. And so I'm like, crap, he's really hurt.
We're going to divert real quick to thank our sponsors. Ready Bar, originally made for astronauts, now designed for first responders and built for you. This high-performance meal bar provides complete nutrition without the sugar crash. A must-have for any helmet bag, swimmer bag, or everyday pack. Get yours today at getreadybar.com and use the promo code RESQ10 for 10% off. Ready Bar, zero crash, all fuel.
We get in there and he's doing this tripod position. And the reason people do that tripod position is because it allows them to expand their chest more and take in a deeper breath. And it also allows them to create a little bit of back pressure. It's actually something we commonly see people who have COPD or chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. Right, it's something we commonly, like lifelong smokers, you know, it's something we commonly see them do to get a deep breath. It also turned out that this patient did have COPD as well, but that's
gosh.
Yeah, it did turn out that he had that. But also, which is probably why he was doing that.
That's how I shouldn't laugh at that. That's not good.
Yeah, no, but
I don't mean to laugh at that.
No, it's totally fine, but it ended up being kind of interesting. So he did have that COPD, and so we go up and we talk to him. He tells us what happened. He kind of tells us from where he fell. I asked him, do you know how far it was, how far the fall was? He goes, I don't know. And then his buddy said, I don't know, maybe 20 to 40 feet. I'm like, okay, so, 20 to twice that, copy that. But one important thing to note is someone can become gravely injured from a 6-foot fall. So really, once you get past 6 feet, who cares if it's 100 feet? It's
going to hurt the same.
Yeah.
Maybe
it's a problem. So
it might hurt a little bit more if you hit more on the way down. But
Exactly. But you head first off a 6-foot ladder. I've seen some absolutely gnarly patients who don't make it from that. So it's you got to keep in fact, for newer paramedics, we often like to tell them like, hey, don't concern yourself so much with the mechanism of injury, like the fall, and concern yourself more with the patient assessment, because people can get hurt in surprising ways. And so with this guy, I'm seeing him in this tripod position, and I'm thinking of the shortness of breath. And he's already got his shirt off, which is thankful. I mean, it's people always
hot.
Yeah, it was hot, and people always make the joke that EMS is a naked sport. So if you can get naked before we get there, it makes our job easy. That's all I'm saying. But anyway, yeah, it's
oh my God, that is hilarious. I've never heard that before. That's fantastic.
If you got your favorite shirt on, man, yeah,
take it off.
It's
or you're
going
getting
away.
A new favorite shirt.
Because unfortunately, when paramedics forget to do that, especially when they're newer, they think, the patient's not complaining of any pain. It's fine. They pull them into the ER and the doctor takes the shirt off and there'll be a big wound on the chest because the patient has like a broken finger. So they're not focused on that. You ever see the movie Major Pain?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, where he breaks the guy's finger so he doesn't worry about the gunshot in the leg. Distracting injuries are a real deal, man. They can screw you up. So, but anyway, so I look at him and he's just got this obvious right-sided chest injury. There's bruising, there's abrasions, there's this redness going on. And I'm like, man, it wasn't super easy to see if he had a broken rib or not, because I'm not trying to be insulting or disparaging, but it's easier to assess for broken ribs if ribs are visible than if they are not visible. Right. Due to the just the size of the person, and so exactly if he had a broken rib or not, just from visually, it was difficult to assess. So the next thing we like to do is a process called palpation, which just means feeling and squeezing the chest. And then it became apparent that he had rib fractures just by pushing on the right side of that chest. Immediate elicitation of pain. If he took too deep of a breath, pain would come out, all that kind of stuff. The other thing that I wanted to make sure is, though, when you're focusing on your breathing, you don't focus on much else. Right. And so we were really cautious to do a head to toe on this guy to make sure that, are we missing something else? Like, are we going to do a spinal assessment and find a step off, which is a clear cut indicator of a spinal fracture, those kind of things. So we did a head to toe on him. And aside from some minor abrasions, he was in pretty good shape, except for that chest trauma. And so when we have that chest trauma, with the potential for a broken rib, the next biggest thing that we worry about is something called a pneumothorax or a hemothorax. And that is where a pocket of air forms between the chest wall and the lung. And your lung is really supposed to stick to that chest wall. And it does at all times in a typical healthy person. However, things that will make it detach is blunt trauma to the chest, which this guy clearly has. And the other thing is if your lungs already have a disease process going on like COPD. And one of the problems with COPD comes a lack of elasticity in the lungs, right? So lungs are very stretchy, and that stretchiness is a really good quality to staying stuck to something. When those lungs become diseased, they lose that elasticity, and they don't like to stretch as well. And so when they take an impact, there's almost a brittleness to them, and they'll tend to want to break away as opposed to flex with that impact. And so I have a patient who has a medical history that makes him likely for this pneumothorax to form, and now he has a mechanism that makes it likely for the pneumothorax to form. So my next thing to do is let's check his vital signs and his assessment and see, has a pneumothorax formed? So a simple pneumothorax is one that I would absolutely be fine with. And basically what that means is there's a pocket of air, but it's not really a big deal. What becomes a problem is when that pocket of air or pocket of blood becomes so great that it starts exerting pressure within the chest. And what it will do is it will push inward towards the middle, and your heart has two big garden hoses that feed it and one big garden hose that puts blood out to the body. And those two big garden hoses, if you're on the right side, if your injury's on the right side, that's going to be the superior and inferior vena cava. That's basically when your cells and your organs are done with the blood and it wants to return it to the heart, it goes through that highway. But if you put a ton of pressure on those two garden hoses, the person dies because the blood doesn't return. And think about a pump running dry, like a sump pump.
Right.
All of a sudden, it has nothing to feed it. And what's going to happen is two things. One, no blood is going to come out the other end and get fresh oxygenated blood to the rest of the body. That's not going to happen because nothing's coming in. And two, the heart itself is going to start to burn up just like a pump would, because the heart also needs blood. It has to feed itself. And so you're going to have two things working against you, and those patients will die like that. And this is where kind of the cool part of our job comes in. If we recognize that, there's only a handful of field surgical interventions that we're allowed to do. And one called a thoracocentesis is one of them. And it's for this specific case. And so I'm like, okay, I'm in the bottom of a ravine. I'm the only paramedic. I have 2 EMTs with me. There's allegedly more people coming, but we're a ways away. It's going to be a while. It's just us. I might have to do this thing by myself. With really, I mean, not by myself. I have my EMTs to support, but they're basically going to hand me the equipment and be like, go for it, and if something goes wrong, there's no one else who can be like, hey, this isn't working right. Do you have any ideas? And I'm like, that's not even in my scope of practice, dude.
Yeah,
Never been trained on that in the first place. This is all you, man. And so the big things that we look for to see if it's a tension pneumothorax is we start trying to measure that output of the heart, right? Because like I said earlier, it's not getting blood to it. So how do we measure, is it getting blood out? And the big thing is you look at blood pressure. What's the person's blood pressure doing? If they're not able to get blood out, then no pressure gets formed and you start seeing these blood pressure drops. And in this guy's case, his blood pressure was actually A-okay.
Nice.
So yeah, the other thing we'll do is we'll listen to lung sounds. And if someone has a significant enough pneumothorax on one side, you're going to have a muffling or an absence of the lung sounds. And he did have some muffling, but there was still air movement on that side. So I was fairly confident. I was confident that he had a pneumothorax just based on everything going on, but I did not think it was a tension pneumothorax, which is the deadly version. And so thankfully, we did not need to perform the thoracocentesis or the easier term for that is decompress the chest. I think it's the movie Three Kings, I think is what it is, where they're in Iraq, I think it is, and one guy ends up getting a dart in the chest. But anyway, so we did not...
decompression. I'm all about it.
Yeah.
Love them.
Exactly.
Love them.
Yeah, it's a cool thing to do. But we did not need to do that. And so I was kind of happy about that. However, there's a lot of potential for the simple... because almost every tension pneumothorax starts off as a simple, at least in one phase of its life, right? And so there's the potential for it to turn into something worse. And so we were pretty concerned about that. So right around this time, we hatch a plan. One, we want to manage this guy's pain because he's in a ton of it. And the more I can get him to just sit still, the better, because moving around too much is not going to be really great if he has an unstable chest wall with that rib fracture. And then, so that'd be treating his pain. The other thing is to start giving him some oxygen. So there is some concern when giving a COPD patient too much oxygen, but that's over days. That's not really something over the acute setting where we're at. So in this case, what I want to do is give him as much oxygen as possible, because if all of a sudden he collapses and that tension pneumothorax comes to play, there's a lot of stuff we're going to do. And one of the tricks of the trade is if you can take all the air in someone's lungs and replace it with just oxygen, because the normal mix in the atmosphere when you breathe it is only 19 to 20% oxygen.
Oh,
yeah, exactly.
I said 21.
No, but it's fine. It's a range. You're set, man. You're good.
All right, good.
And then the rest is mostly nitrogen, and then there's a small sliver that's like argon and CO2, and who cares?
Yeah.
So if what we can do, and so that's why. So if you hold your breath, you got like 5 to 6 minutes before you're with an anoxic brain injury on a normal air mix. But if we take those lungs and we replace all of that nitrogen with just oxygen, because oxygen displaces nitrogen really well, in the lungs, then you wind up with someone who can stay apneic for up to 9 minutes and be fine. And so I'm like, hey, let's start doing that, to where if all of a sudden this lung goes and this guy isn't able to breathe, we still got some oxygen in the reserve, and it gives us time to do our interventions and get him back without causing an anoxic brain injury in the first place. Because a lot of, once someone's oxygen saturations dip too low, you can get the oxygen saturations up later, but the damage is done, and you can be like, okay, now their blood has a ton of oxygen in it, but the brain matter is already destroyed, and so this helps us avoid that. So we started down that route, and then we basically started to hatch a plan. How do we get this guy out of here? Now, because like I said, on the way in, I barely made it down, let alone making it back out, hauling this guy. And at
with
that
all
point,
your equipment, with the other people that are there.
Oh yeah, exactly. And so it's yeah, and so it was a super big challenge. And our flight service, the flight service that Dan and I work for now, Life Flight Network, they don't hoist, and so we knew that they weren't going to be an option. And it was at that point, it was I think it was one of the firefighters had said, the firefighter that was with us was like, hey, I think this is going to be a Coast Guard deal. And I'm like, yeah, let's go the Coast Guard route. I think that is the best path of the best path at this point. So I ended up giving the patient, we started a couple IVs in him, gave him some fentanyl. So just we give it in micrograms. Don't worry, we don't like scrape it into a pipe and have them cook it or anything like that. That's not the field administration of fentanyl. But then all of a sudden, a lot of firefighters show up. And it was kind of one of those things where it was like, oh, thank goodness, I'm no longer alone. And we had a ton of people showing up all of a sudden, and they started coordinating with the United States Coast Guard. And basically during that time, the Coast Guard said, hey, we're going to be en route. They gave us an ETA. I don't remember what it was, but it was going to be a little bit, and we knew that going into it. It's like, hey, this is not a quick operation. We need to kind of figure out what our stay and play plan here is. The other thing too is, we had to figure out oxygen logistics, because I have, one cylinder, one tank that's running out. So we need to keep this guy oxygenated for as long as possible. And so we figured that out. And thankfully, between our ambulance, which has spares, the fire engine that has spares, we calculated that we had 7 hours of oxygen for this guy. Something nice. Ridiculous to where it's like, we can stay. So we're fine. We weren't concerned about that. Pretty much the story from here to there is just we continually monitor this guy. One of the things that I really like to do, and Dan will vouch for this because he's heard us on many flights, is I have found that if I prepare for the worst never happens. It's only when I forget to prepare that the worst case scenario happens. So we scare it away. So there are more paramedics on scene now, which is always helpful. And one of the other paramedics came over and we discussed it, and we had an entire plan set up. All right, so this guy develops a tension pneumo. Who's going to push the needle? Okay, I'm going to push the needle. Who's going to prepare? There's a valve that goes on the end of that needle. Who's going to prepare the valve? Who's going to recheck lung sounds? If we have to then take his airway with a laryngoscope and putting a tube in his throat, who's going to drop the drugs? Everyone had a role, almost to the point that I kind of wanted it to happen because we were going to do so well. I mean, that not. I don't want this guy to be hurt.
I get it.
Oh man, we were ready.
We're so pumped.
When you sharpen the knife, you just want to cut something. That's where we were at, and we were ready. But it didn't happen. But we were set. We were pumped and ready. And then we started hearing that humpa thumpa come on over, and we're like, they're getting here. All right,
hold that thought right there. So I want to know real quick, between the phone call to hey, let's get the Coast Guard there, to when they arrived on scene, about how long was it for you guys on the ground doing patient
Oh my
care?
goodness. I don't want to say it was more than 2 hours, maybe about an hour 30. I think that was a while ago.
That's all right. About an hour and a half. So you have to maintain the stability of a patient for an hour and a half on scene in the wilderness at the bottom of a ravine.
Yes.
Put that right there. Right.
Yeah.
Now the other
when
thing,
you put it like
Dan,
that's cool.
I don't know about you, but I think right now I just got 1 hour worth of CE hours for all of my refresher stuff.
Yeah, we can sign that off.
And look, if you want more continuing education, head on over to flightbridgeed.com and check out.
Wow,
sorry,
that's freaking awesome.
Shameless plug.
There it is.
It's perfect because I feel like I've just gone through a refresher class right now. This is so exciting.
Well, it's funny because what we do now at Lifelight, when we get new medics and new nurses, both Chris and Jeremy, Jeremy Houston, one of our other medics, they are just top notch at breaking new people in and showing them the process and things they need to be thinking of. And for me as an observer, as someone that, for lack of better words, I'm just driving the bus, it's really fun to watch.
I will absolutely say, working at the agency we work now, these are some of the we live in an area where we have very talented and well-supported paramedics and EMS, which is fantastic. The people I worked with here have humbled me. These are some of the best clinicians I've met in my entire life. And so every day you go to work just trying to live up to that standard because these guys are good. And you mentioned Jeremy. Jeremy's good. Jeremy's very good.
That's awesome.
So yeah, it's a fantastic agency to work for. So...
Well, hold on. It's not your turn yet. We're gonna get. No, you get put in the corner for a minute.
Okay. What is it? Cup his talking stick. Take his talking stick.
Oh man.
I will say this, right? Because you said you talk about this guy Jeremy. I don't know Jeremy, but I can tell you, like, some of the medics that I have worked with in side by side and learned from. My gosh, just incredible. The knowledge that they have and the common sense that goes into it is, I learned so much of that. It makes a world of difference when you start doing it on your own. So it's amazing. So anyway, that little side note there. All right, Dan, I'm coming to you. So the call comes into the U.S. Coast Guard from the firefighters saying, we need help. We're going to divert real quick to thank our sponsors.
Whether your mission is saving lives or servicing high-value assets, Onboard Systems Hoist stays ready to assist. Features such as single-point payout reduce the potential for hoist-induced load swings, enhancing overall safety. For more information, go to hoist-winch.onboardsystems.com.
So we relieve at 3 o'clock. So it was after 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I'm the aircraft commander. Jason Maddox is our co-pilot. Jason is a brand new co-pilot. Sharp, smart, knows the aircraft. Our flight mechanic is Danny Bovard. Danny, again, just one of our best. Our rescue swimmer is the station chief, Joel Sayers. Again,
nice.
Best person we could have.
Freaking love Joel. Joel's a good dude all the way around. I love that guy.
We've done enough inland SAR and Astoria that when we hear person in a ravine, we start looking at a fifth person to add to clear the tail between the 9 o'clock and the 6 o'clock position. So we got this little stud named Josh Holt. And Holt is he's one of those guys that stayed late, came there early. Plus, he's only about 120 pounds soaking wet. So we're like, Josh, come on, you're coming with us. And we hear person in a ravine. So we fly. It's about a 25-minute flight from Astoria to Gales Creek. Circle. We see them. And the area is so tight that we start talking to Joel. And Joel's like, hey, put me on the side of that hill and I'll just climb down. Because let's get him on the ground. So we put Joel on the side of the hill. He climbs down. He assesses it. And he says, I think it's big enough. I think it's big enough. And we're surrounded by 200-foot trees. So we have to go down into these trees with a 200-foot long cable in order to hoist. And so we set up on top. We do our high recon, our low recon. We assign our sectors of who's going to look where. And we literally con our way down into this hole. And we're 150 feet below the tree line now. All right. So the hoist brief under emergencies, we literally say that if the engine fails, we will come forward and crash because that way we won't land on the rescuers below us.
Nice.
So pretty serious.
Yeah.
I believe
now, mind you, and you are flying the H-60, the Jayhawk, beast of an aircraft.
11 tons of American freedom. Absolutely.
Can I get an amen?
Right. So it's a hot day, but again, in the Hawk, it's not that big of a deal. Power is not a challenge at this point. It's late afternoon, early evening. So the basket, we try to con in, and Danny, who is just one of the best flight mechanics in the world, says easy back and left. And the first thing we hear Josh say is hold. You can't go back any further. And so, as Chris will tell you, we had basically conned ourselves into a hole that's just big enough for a Jayhawk helicopter.
Yeah, they had a Jayhawk in a Jayhawk-shaped hole. That's what they had.
And
hold on, dude. I got to come back to Chris real quick. Joel Sayers gets down to you.
Yeah.
And give me the brief that you gave to him. And then give me the brief that he gave to you.
Yeah.
Gotcha. So he started, he went first. And I will say this, it was a masterclass in establishing command presence, which I thought I was really good at until Joel Sayers came down. It was just basically like, okay,
bro, I freaking
here's
love
what's
that
going
guy.
to happen. Tell me what's going on and tell me who's coming with me. That's basically what it was. So I said, hey, we've got and I forget the age of the guy. I think he was in his 50s. We've got a 50-year-old male fall down some rocks here. My biggest concern is that he's got a pneumothorax on his right side. He has a history of COPD. This is what we've been doing for him. He may need a decompression en route. And so he's like, all right, who's going with? And I'm like, and then all of a sudden this firefighter that had been working with me is like, I'm going to go. And he just jumped in so here's one of the things that I want to say before. We all know that when you're in the industry, different branches, different industries, we give each other nonstop shit. That's just
Of
how
course.
it goes, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
you have
I'd
to.
be upset if you didn't give me a hard time.
Right,
Or
it would be
any
something-
shit.
You'd be like, God, what did I do to disappoint you? You haven't ribbed me at all.
Right.
I'm not part
but-
of the club.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You really got to worry about that.
Oh, you think I got feelings now? Is that the problem? Oh, God.
So, well, and I will say this before I rag on him a little bit. I want to make one thing clear to anybody listening, and that is that the fire service is an absolutely essential service, and we're blessed to have them the way we do in our country, specifically that department. There are a lot of departments that are absolutely fantastic, but not just that department, but that crew that was there. If it was ever my kids, I would want them showing up, and that's the highest compliment I can give any clinician. So before I go into ribbing them, I think establishing that foundation is the most important part.
That was really good. Yeah, let's get into it now.
They stole my glory that day. And their excuse was that I didn't have a helmet. And I'm sitting there thinking, I'm like, we're winching a guy out of a ravine. We were about to do field surgery, and the speed bump to me getting my cool ride is you can't give me a helmet. But anyway, I just and so
got one more question. Did the patient have a helmet?
I don't think he did.
I might throw that in there. I just like
the best part about it was everyone heard about this too, of course. And so I went back to base, to our base after it was done. And the guy I do the podcast with now, Spencer Oliver, he comes up to me, and this is before we even did the podcast. He's like, "Hey man, I heard about your call." He goes for a high five, but before we make contact, he flies his hand away like a helicopter. He's like, "Oh, not for you." That's what he did. You jerk.
that's funny.
So anyways, that's how that went. But yeah, we gave him the rundown. We helped load this guy. And then a firefighter paramedic from Forest Grove went along with good paramedic. So the standard of care was certainly maintained.
Perfect. So now, Dan, I know you up in the area. Joel gets on the radio and says, "Okay, this is what we got. Send down the basket. Let's get him in the basket and let's go." You put the helicopter in a helicopter-sized hole fit specifically for the helicopter to get Joel and the patient. All right, go.
Right. So we're in this hole, and we've already briefed it up that if the engine fails, we're coming forward and down and crashing. Okay.
Okay.
I have to get conned in. The first thing Danny says, basket, goes through a rescue checklist part 2 for a basket delivery to the ground. And he says, easy back and left. And Josh immediately says, who's watching the 6 to 9 o'clock? Josh says, hold, can't go any farther back that way. And like, can I move my tail? No. We can't? No. All right. Okay, we're right here. And so he brings the basket down, gets it close to them, but they have to like tug it back to like the 7 or 8 o'clock to put it on the ground and load the patient. We then like incrementally load him up, comes in. Danny does a great job with the hoist, bring him into the aircraft. Now, because we don't lower our level of care, we had a paramedic. We're going to take a paramedic with us, and we're going to go to a hospital in Portland, 15 minutes away. So, rescue checklist part 2 for pickup of the swimmer and the passenger. Cable goes down, cable starts to come up, and all of a sudden we hear, wah, like a leaf blower going off, and I know exactly what that means. Now, because the Hawk is so awesome, we have rear view mirrors. I look in the rear view mirror, my tail road is still clear. Danny Boulevard, cool as a cucumber, says we had some branches come down into the rotor tip vortices. I'm continuing with the hoist. Okay? So we hear, wah, and I'm looking for feedback on the controls. There's no feedback on the controls. Immediately, the emergency procedure is going through my head. And it's feedback in the controls, land immediately. Feedback not in the controls, land as soon as practicable. We get them in. We have to come up 150 feet now to get outside of the tree line. Okay?
Holy shit.
Once we get outside of the tree line, I go, Joel, how bad is this guy? He goes, we need to get him to a hospital now. I go, Joel, can I land in this field? If you land in that field, he could die.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
We are 8 minutes, maybe 9 minutes from St. Vincent's. Okay? That's it. I'm going to St. Vincent's. Okay? Again, monitoring for secondaries for any feedback in the controls. There's none. We start rocking towards St. Vincent's. We got to go through Class D airspace at Hillsborough. I don't even request it. And I just say, Coast Guard Rescue 6013. I'm 4.5 to the southwest. I'm coming through the Class Delta for an urgent search and rescue, an urgent rescue headed to St. Vincent's. And fortunately, everyone at Hillsborough just said, Roger, you're cleared. We're 5 minutes out, and we hear the pad at St. V's is not rated for the 60. Because, again, the 60 is 11 tons of American freedom. It's 22,000 pounds. Most EMS helicopters are under 10. And I just say, we're going to St. Vincent's. I'll find somewhere to land. Fortunately, there's enough grass next to the helipad. We put it down right in the grass, okay? And we shut it down. And I'm thinking, okay, that's it. My career's over. We got some brush through the blades. They're going to vilify me. What I don't know at the same time is there was a news TV helicopter on top of us, watching the whole thing, filming the whole thing. Literally saw the brush come down into the blades, and we emulsify it, and then we climb out of there. And they filmed us the whole way to St. Vincent's, and they actually have a picture of me or a video of me of while the thing's coasting down. I'm rubbing my face like this because I'm like, I just either bought 4 blades or I'm not flying anymore. But, it's funny, in the Coast Guard, you make a deal with yourself where you say, if I rescue someone and I save their life and the Coast Guard decides to take my wings from me, I'm okay with it. I just never thought I'd have to be having that thought in my head. So the helo's coasting down, and I'm thinking, okay, we got to get 4 new rotor blades out here and maintenance. And my phone rings, and it's the skipper, it's the CO, Captain Travers. And in one of the best leadership speeches I've ever gotten, I pick up the phone. I go, Skipper, it's Dan. And he goes, hey, you did everything right. You're good to go. Can't wait to talk to you about this. And
yes,
that is, and that's a tough call for an 06 to make, given that no one's investigated this yet, and just putting the trust in us that we did the right thing. But man, we really needed to hear that right then, So
wow.
Joel takes the patient. We hand him off to EMS. We push him into St. V's. We get a ladder from the custodians. And again, the Hawk is an amazing machine. Danny inspects the blades, and he goes, sir, we have 4 green marks about 18 inches in from the rotor tip cap. I'm like, okay, what are we doing? Are we pulling the blades and track and balance? He goes, maintenance recommends we fly at home. I'm like, what? We can fly at home? And I'm like, and I'm the former maintenance officer at this time, and I trust all those guys. Those are my guys in maintenance. So I'm like, if maintenance says we can fly at home, we can fly at home. And then I look at the crew and I said, hey, is everybody here good to go? Fly at home, because maintenance said we could. And they said, yeah, sure, fly at home. So that's exactly what we did. We flew at home.
Oh my gosh. That is epic.
Yeah, okay. It was a pretty busy afternoon.
All right, so I'm going to come back to landing at the base. We're going to divert real quick to thank our sponsors, the realrescuestore.com. Your shop for all your podcast-worthy gear. From comfortable shirts to cozy mugs, we've got everything to showcase your love for your favorite podcast. So what are you waiting for? Head to the realrescuestore.com and let your gear do the talking. Chris, you see and hear this above you.
Yeah.
What is going through your head and everybody else around you that's like hearing this in real time, watching it in real time? Like, right, I get it. Like, the patient is already gone, and then the 2 rescuemen are on their way up. You guys are just like, cool, my job is done here.
Yeah.
And then you hear that.
So yeah, that was fascinating. to think about
Great
being down
word.
there.
Great.
It's,
Fascinating. Okay.
That was a fascinating experience. So the thing is, we were kind of in a bowl, if you will, just kind of the way the terrain was, and so we weren't actually able to see much because when they started lifting off, which I believe the correct term is pulling pitch, but when they start moving, a lot of force comes down, and any speck of dust that thought it was going to remain in place is now getting relocated at a rapid velocity, and so we're getting pelted and hit with sticks and all that stuff, and so we're all kind of we've all turned away and we're covering, and my partner, she turns and she has long hair and her hair is just whipping, and I'm just sitting there getting her hair like in my face because we're next to each other. And it's just, and I'm sitting there trying to breathe and swat that away. And then we hear that just like this bump like that. And it was kind of one of those things that I don't know if it's just amplified because it was below us, but and maybe it was just because our senses were already heightened because for us, this is big, right? Like this is my first time being this close to this kind of helicopter. I'm underneath it being pelted with sticks, but then you hear that sound and your immediate thought is, oh, it's coming down. Like like something has gone wrong. It was like, you ever play the game of Operation, where you're trying to get the little thing out and there's things. I felt like Dan just hit the sides of the operation. He just lost, and because what I did know was I knew that they had come through a very small hole to get where they were at. And so when you heard that sound, your brain doesn't go to good places when you're already kind of at a heightened sense because this is all new to you. But then it was over and done. They flew away and I'm like, I wonder what that sound was. That was so bizarre, and then we grabbed our crap and we hiked back out, and that was about it. So, all of our equipment, I will say this, Dan, all of our equipment was thoroughly covered in dust.
I'm sure.
No, just absolutely trashed. One of the tops of one of the kits was open, and which is my fault. But it was just filled with dirt and debris.
Up and over
Stuff. Oh, that's what we did. We just took it back to clean it out. So, yeah, I felt bad. So when we get back to base, we have these wonderful people. They're called vehicle service technicians, and what they do is they take all of our stuff and they restock the ambulance and clean it out for us. And it's a luxury service to have. I did not make them clean that out. I stayed out there and we all cleaned it together. I was not going to feel like, hey, your day super sucky now. Like it was bad. I'm like, no. I'm not just going to turn this over to somebody else.
That's very nice of you. Very admirable. Good job. Good job.
No. I just I don't know. I just I'm like, I don't want them to quit. I appreciate all the times where where I'm not that gracious and they come in and help me out. So if I want to keep being lazy at the end of my shift, I better be nice to these guys. They run the show.
I love it. All right. So now, Dan, I gotta come back to you. So now you get back to base and land the helicopter. Now, I can neither confirm nor deny that I've ever clipped a branch or top of a tree in my flights with an 860, but go ahead. How did that all? Did anything ever happen, like in the post flight and the through flight?
Well, no.
All the inspections.
Captain Travers was there, and of course, we had a great command structure. So the skipper's there, and he's talking to the crew and making sure everybody's good, and and pats them all on the back. And of course, everyone in maintenance, they get the check stands out and they want to go look at the blades, and there's literally nothing wrong with the blades.
No way.
So they did a post flight, and guess what? Aircraft's back in service.
Oh my God, I love it. God, I love that aircraft.
Yeah, I didn't know that such a small impact of like a of brush would make a huge sound like that. But when you think about how fast the blades are moving, it makes sense.
Dang. Gentlemen, my goodness, what a story. I am so happy you guys came out here to tell that story. Right. I was not expecting that at all. Right?
I have one thing to add. Chris has gotten his ride in a 60. So one of the cool things Lifelight Network does, and it's pretty unique, is if the Coast Guard requests, we will put our medic and our nurse on their helicopter. They've been trained, and they put on the Mustang suit, and we'll go 300 miles offshore because you've been 300 miles offshore as a basic EMT, Quinny, and you get a patient where what are you going to do? You're going to stabilize them. Or you could have two more people with you with ICU level experience and equipment to affect to affect saving this person right away. So it doesn't happen an awful lot, but most of our medics and nurses at Life Flight 14 Astoria have flown with the 60 from Astoria.
I've got a Sikorsky Award.
Yeah, we get him a Sikorsky Award.
Yeah,
so Sikorsky Award.
I'll be brief. I'm gonna add to that. Dan's being a bit humble, and he shouldn't be. That whole idea, our ability to do that actually stemmed from Dan having the thought on a call years ago, where there was a patient that we just couldn't get to. They needed the ICU level care, but it was something we couldn't get to, and it was actually Dan who said, "Hey, let's call the Coast Guard and send our crew with the Coast Guard," and they did it, and it worked. And since then, Dan took that torch and ran with it, and it involved many more such situations. And I'll tell you very briefly about one I got to go on. It was the coolest thing ever because it was an oil rig, a tanker of some kind, and they had a medical emergency on there. No one else can get to that oil tanker but the Coast Guard. There's nobody in that area that's better suited for that. No one else is going to glide along a moving ship that's still moving, put a swimmer down and bring them up. But what was cool is that this guy's particular problem, he was having a stroke, and he's 200 something miles offshore. He's having a stroke. No other clinical team in the back of that helicopter was more appropriate than my partner and I on that one. And so having that together and being able to do that mission the way it was made a profound difference in that guy's life. So we ended up giving him a medication that significantly reduced. The problem is we believe, and it ended up being confirmed, he was bleeding in his brain. It was a spontaneous rupture of a vessel. Dang. And what you want to control in that case, you have a leaky pipe, right? Well, you don't want a whole ton of pressure going into that leaky pipe. But the problem is the brain thinks it needs more pressure because it's not getting blood. And so it assumes there's something wrong with the pressure system, even though really the problem is the pipe is broken. And so what it does is it tries to build more pressure. Well, that just causes more leaking in the pipe because your brain's smart, but it ain't that smart. And so what we did was we were able to give a medication that reduced his blood pressure in a very controlled manner. We actually, it's an infusion that titrate it. It's a medication called nicardipine. Yeah. And so we have to start an IV, and then we actually put it on a pump. It's a piece of equipment, and you titrate the rate to a certain milligrams an hour. And what you do is you give it, and then in 5 minutes you see where their blood pressure's up, and then you increase or decrease it. And it's kind of a delicate dance. And then we can give adjunct medications on top of that, like labetalol and esmolol. There's just other drugs we can give on top of that to reduce blood pressure. All the alls. Yeah. So we could do that to control this guy's blood pressure. And we did that. We brought his blood pressure was in the 200s, the systolic, the upper number, which is astronomically high. And we brought it down to this butter zone of about 140 to 150 because you don't want to dump it too fast. And we brought it down to there. And when we first picked him up, he had all your classic stroke signs. By the time we landed, he had none. He was able to stand up and sit down on his own power. And then we called later, got follow-up. Dude's 100% fine. He had to get some minor procedures done. He was going to go home. And because the Coast Guard does what the Coast Guard does that no one else could do, and because we were available to do what we do, that guy had an incident that would have absolutely changed his life and what he could do going forward. Changed his entire life. Would have been a life-changing event to something that was now just a cool helicopter ride, and he ended up being okay. And so anyway, that's a long way of saying Dan needs
you earned
good credit.
A Sikorsky Award, and Dan gets some credit for it.
The medical crews treat the Sikorsky Awards like we treat DFCs or air medals.
They're cool, man.
It's a huge deal. They the medical crews love the bling on the name tags. Yeah. So I mean, it's a small thing. It's easy to do. The Coast Guard at Air Station Astoria, they're great about putting them in. It's an easy thank you.
That's awesome.
Well, all that,
Chris,
but
I can tell you this, Chris, real quick, and that is it. I want to give you a major congratulations on earning yourself the Sikorsky Award because I myself do not have one. How's that for you? Swear to God.
If you're ever in Oregon, I'll let you wear mine.
Buddy, yes. I'll take it.
No, I wanted to tell that story because I wanted it to be very clear about the importance about Dan coming up with that idea and starting that has led to the increased quality of life and lives saved directly because he took that initiative, and it's important to get out there. So
nice job, Dan. Yeah, kudos. Cool. You guys, literally, I'm blown away. I did not expect this story. This is why I love doing this podcast. This is why I love these stories so much, because they're so unique. They're so different, and everything that goes involved with it. There's so many different aspects, and these stories just don't ever get out enough. And I love the fact that you guys were able to come on and share this with us. It's been amazing, and I greatly, greatly appreciate it. So thank you.
You bet, Quinny. Happy to help. It's always great to chat with you.
You as well.
This was amazing, man. The energy of this podcast is awesome. I listened to a few episodes before I got here. I was stoked to be here. It's awesome.
It's all real too. Like I really get this excited, even in person. People are like, this is all fake. No, it's not. Dan?
No.
No, it's real. It's real.
It's real.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what, guys, when I get a chance and I get out to Astoria, I'm calling you guys. We're going to go have a drink and just enjoy a couple more stories. I want to hear more because it's.
There's more.
We'll see you at Heli Expo next year, Quinny.
Oh, game on. You know what? We'll record there too. That's what I'm saying.
I like it.
Okay. Yeah. Record in person
down.
with the latest and greatest. I'm in.
Yep.
I'm in.
Deal.
All right. Sounds good, man. Thank you so much.
You guys are welcome. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we are out of here.
Go.
Now it's time for me to pull chocks and take off. But before I go, I'm always looking for the memorable rescues that people have done. If you have one that you're willing to share or know somebody who has a story, please feel free to reach out to me. I'd love to highlight it here at the Real ResQ. For everybody that is standing by for that SAR alarm, remember, those in distress are praying for a miracle. They are going to get you. So until next time, fly safe and swim hard. Thank you for joining me today here at the Real ResQ Podcast, powered by Vertical Helicast. We'd also like to say thank you to our sponsors for this episode.
Whether your mission is saving lives or servicing high-value assets, Onboard Systems Hoist stays ready to assist. Features such as single-point payout reduce the potential for hoist-induced load swings, enhancing overall safety. For more information, go to hoist-winch.onboardsystems.com.
Ready Bar, originally made for astronauts, now designed for first responders and built for you. This high-performance meal bar provides complete nutrition without the sugar crash. A must-have for any helmet bag, swimmer bag, or everyday pack. Get yours today at getreadybar.com and use the promo code RESQ10 for 10% off. Ready Bar, zero crash, all fuel. And the realrescuestore.com, your shop for all your podcast-worthy gear. From comfortable shirts to cozy mugs, we've got everything to showcase your love for your favorite podcast. So what are you waiting for? Head to the realrescuestore.com and let your gear do the talking.
Man, that was an awesome episode of the Real ResQ Podcast. The only thing that make it better was if it was Commander. How you doing, sir?
Man, Quinny's awesome, man. He motivates me. I just got done doing a bunch of push-ups. Yeah, I mean, he is something else. I mean, if you like his sort of style, if you like that sort of thing, but it got me to do push-ups.
Hey, you know what would be better, though, is if you listen to the Hangar Z podcast.
Well, that's a given, John. That is a given.